Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of our series of interviews on digital transformation. This is something that we're doing as part of the Substack DX Bridging the Divide, and I'm really thrilled to have our first one here be talking about a successful digital transformation, because the whole point of these interviews is going to be to learn more about the things that you need to know in order to be successful in doing digital transformation. Now, I sometimes feel totally like a broken record when I'm highlighting, emphasizing, reiterating that digital transformation is not a transformation of your digital infrastructure, that it's a transformation of your business using technology, right? This is, how do you think differently about solving your customers' problems, not how do you innovate on cool technology. But then I have days like today where I get to talk to somebody who really has done this the right way, has actually kicked off a business problem and solved it using technology as an enabler, not a goal. And then I just get giddy because this is super fun to talk about. And it's super fun to see how it really can work and how it can change your entire customer experience. So today I'm really excited to have Nick Franklin as a guest. And I've been lucky enough to know Nick since college. And so I am not at all surprised to see the incredible success that he's had in his career. Today, we're going to be diving deep into what was called the Next Gen Experience project that he led as an EVP at Disney. Since then, he's done some other cool stuff. I think my favorite, though, is his time as president of Kelly Slater Wave Company and World Surf League. Because if that does not prove that you don't necessarily need to understand an industry in order to be effective at driving growth and transformation, nothing will. Okay, so Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Brigid. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, before we dive into the questions that I have and our listeners have on the Next Gen Experience, do you want to give folks a little bit of background on how you ended up being tapped for such a massive transformation at Disney?
Sure. It sort of, in some ways, was a natural outgrowth of my career progression at Disney. I'd been really fortunate, having started in strategy, to have had great mentors who helped me grow and develop, gave me opportunities to transition from being a staff guy to being an operator. And I got exposed to all parts of the parks business around the world. And then, really, as part of the business development function and the executive committee that I sat on that led the business, we started this exploration of what the future of the parks could look like. And it was just logical to then have somebody from that senior leadership group step in and drive the transformation.
It makes sense. I love that it was part of the business, not this sort of external bolted on thing.
Yeah.
So, can you start off just by telling us what is the problem that you guys were actually trying to solve with the Next Gen Experience?
So, look, sometimes you have the opportunity when you are a clear industry leader, which Disney is in the theme park space. You can just take an approach that says, you know what, we got this figured out, and there's no need to make any dramatic changes because nothing's broken, and that's really where we were. But at the same time, we were spending a lot of time paying attention to what our customers were saying, and then there were things that our customers were doing, waiting in line, having to reintroduce themselves to different people within the organization at different moments in time, things that were causing friction in their experience that were preventing us from providing as good a vacation experience, as good an escape, as much magic, to use the Disney term, as we really wanted. And so we kind of realized we needed to raise the bar on ourselves by figuring out how to reduce friction and make it a better experience for our guests.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I think the point of friction is one, sometimes we just get inured to it, right? Like we start saying it's inevitable. And what I love about technology is not that, quantum mechanics is going to, change the world tomorrow, but that some of the things that exist now can actually take friction out of your daily life. You just need to think about how to use them.
Well, you have to start by understanding where the points of friction are.
Ah,
And one of the things that we did, so the real impetus for this, just to give you the background, is the iPhone came out in 2007. And the dynamics of having a functional smart device in your hand that lent itself to visual imagery. If you remember, the first thing that the iPhone showed was the pinching and scaling of photos and things like that, that made it clear that this was a device for interacting with the world, interacting with content and other things. So that caused us to step back and say, if we were starting from scratch now and had the opportunity to build Disney from a white sheet of paper, what would be different? And how would we create a different kind of engagement in the experience, leveraging this new technology to make it a more seamless, more personalized, more customized experience? Because the iPhone was all about make this mine, right? Make this unique to me. And we sat about putting a small group together. We created a skunkworks group with some technologists, a product development guy, an operations guy, some creative leaders, pulled them out of their day-to-day jobs and had them go really skunkworks and think about what that might look like. And as part of that effort, we went through and we looked at the entirety of the customer journey and every single interaction with the customer and said, is this a good interaction or a bad interaction? Is this an interaction that is positive and useful and productive from the customer standpoint, or something that we're making them do because of our org chart, because of our technology, because of whatever? And that gave us a real roadmap as to what the points of friction were and the places where we could think about trying to make it better.
that's fantastic. Um, I love that you were proactive in disrupting yourselves. I think a lot of times companies sort of get comfortable and they say, you know what, we're the best. Like this is where we need to be. We just need to stay here. The problem is that something is going to disrupt you at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And if you look, it's much, much harder to change yourself than it is to come in and be the disruptor. I remember at one point presenting to the Disney board of directors when I was asking for the budget for the next generation work. And one of the board members was talking about the app and the suite of products that we were looking to develop, and basically said, well, why can't we just be like Uber and just do it? And I said, well, imagine if Uber had started from owning the New York City taxi cab fleet and needed to keep that taxi cab fleet functioning fully, right? I said, this for Walt Disney World and changing the experience there is like flying a 747 while you change the wings, the guidance system, and all the decor. And you got to make sure it doesn't crash. And that helped them understand. But if you don't challenge yourself, someone's going to come along and do it. And by the time they do, it's probably too late. So you're better off challenging yourself.
That makes perfect sense. And I love that you were starting with sort of the disruptor being a technology that wasn't incomprehensible to anyone on the team, right? So you had technologists on your team, but you were thinking about the iPhone, and you guys all probably had an iPhone at that point, right? Like everybody knew kind of what it could do. So it wasn't like, hey, we need this super technical thing that none of us understand. It was, hey, look what this can do. How does
Right.
that change what we do?
And that really was the lens, right? Disney was not a technology company, even though it used an awful lot of technology and tried out everything and was trying to figure out where bleeding edge technology change was going.
Right.
But we weren't inventors. This was not sitting in a garage coming up with new technology and figuring out what something, how to make something happen. This was figuring out some real problems and saying, okay, if we look around, what technologies are out there and can we use them in a different way? Can we use them to solve a problem that maybe nobody's thought about using those technologies for? And for us, it was about making the individual experience less friction filled, more personalized, and more customized.
I think you said something to me the other day that really stuck with me, which was we didn't invent technology. We invented use for technology. And to me, that just captures it.
Yeah, look, my screen seems to be a little bit frozen. I don't know if I'm frozen, but hopefully you can at least hear me if I'm not moving.
I can hear you.
So apologies for that.
No worries. Let me go to the next stage. What did you guys decide the next gen experience should look like? Like, how did
Yes.
that focus you on what you were actually going to do?
So we had a mantra, which was to create a seamless experience.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, one of the real interesting realizations was that for our customers,
Yeah.
they were already having a seamless experience at one level, which is it was the same person that was making a reservation, showing up at the airport, getting on the transportation system, checking into the hotel, going to the theme park, doing all of the things, rides, etc. Um, and where they were being disrupted in that seamlessness was where we focused our attention. How do we make it so that that entire journey for them was as simple and as unique to them as it could possibly be?
Fantastic. Um, and you talk about the single person who's doing it, but they're doing it on behalf of a family. How does that change how you
Well,
think about?
look, at the end of the day, what we really need to know is who somebody is, where they are, and have some control points to make sure that we're letting the right people do the right things. You have the tickets that you've paid for, that you're going on the ride that you're scheduled for, all of those kinds of things. But at Disney, one of the things that was interesting is yes, you're booking as a family, but the experiences are still somewhat individualized, right? And it's not the family meeting Cinderella, it's your 6-year-old daughter, Susie, meeting Cinderella. And so we needed to make sure that our systems, our locations, our places, and our cast members could all recognize Susie, not Susie's family. And so ultimately, we then needed to have a mode of communication to be able to talk to each other, to talk to the guests, and have all those points together. But it came down to the individual and breaking the family booking down into individual experiences.
Fantastic. I mean, that's it just you think about it in such a different way when you contextualize it like that. So that was obviously one big hurdle. What were some of your other hurdles that you had to overcome in order to be successful?
Well, like many companies, we had an organizational structure, and um, the hotels were run separately from the theme parks, from the transportation system, and so each of those organizations, at some level, were a barrier to seamlessness. Right? There were all these handoffs, and the guest was the same guest going across those things, but at some level, we were making them absorb and navigate our org chart. So figuring out how to cut across organizational boundaries was a really important one. Um, Obviously, when you're a long-standing business, you've got legacy systems, underlying systems of record that are at best complicated and in some ways and sometimes completely obsolete. We had an asset management system that had been written in France for the Euro Disney park in Pascal in French. And so, right, first of all, can you find anybody in 2010, 11 that can code in Pascal and speaks French, right? That's not a big set. So we had examples like that. We had lots of legacy systems, and some of the mistakes we made were in not unwinding some of those. I think I told you the story about all the different types of tickets. And instead of redoing our ticketing system and making it simpler so that we could then digitize it, we just digitized the system we had, which in retrospect was probably the wrong choice. We figured it out, but it made it much more complicated. And then I guess the other gigantic hurdle from an organization like Disney is just pure scale. changing a door lock from a VIN card to an RFID lock on an individual basis isn't hard. When you're dealing with 32,000 hotel rooms that are running at 96% occupancy, and a guest is leaving in the morning and their lock is going to be changed out during the day, you've got a different level of communication management, guest management, because at the end of the day, throughout the 3+ years that it took us to roll the next gen stuff out, we had guests that were coming and this was their one trip of a lifetime, and they honestly didn't care that we were in the process of this big experience transformation. They just wanted their experience to be awesome, and we had to make sure that we could deliver on that throughout the time that we were rolling out product iterations and everything else.
I mean, that's such an interesting point, because transformation in general should never end, right? It's part of a culture, not a one-time event. And it is a point that, when you deal with customers, which we all need to deal with, how do you keep them comfortable that things are changing as they watch? So it sounds like you guys did a really good job of making that as painless as possible for customers. Are there?
I think we tried. Look, I don't think it's certainly not easy, right? And it's not just the guest that you're explaining it to, it's all of your cast members who have had their jobs changed, and what they're supposed to do and how they do it changes. And so their ability to provide service to the guest changes. And at the end of the day, it's all about communication. You need a massive amount of transparent communication consistently across the organization so that everybody knows where we're going and why, and where are we on the journey at this moment in time. And that's just crucial.
So can we go a little bit deeper into this? You said at the beginning that you had technical folks on the team, business folks, people from different parts of the organization. How did you guys successfully put a team together and manage how that team changed over time? I mean, did you have people and cultural issues working across so many different parts of the organization?
Absolutely. I mean, effectively, I wound up being the CEO of a startup that was incredibly well funded and living within the confines of a gigantic 250,000 person organization. We grew the team from when it first started at 5, I took over at 15, and ultimately at one point we had 1,500 people on the next gen team. 950 of whom were hardware and software engineers, and I'm not a technologist, and I was managing them through my CTO. And but it was about bringing the right skills together, and then that 1,500 person organization was interfacing with the 65,000 person organization at Walt Disney World. And so there was lots of communication, but part of what we did is we brought people from the existing organization in so that the current way of working was infused so that we knew what we were changing. And I made the team, and I did it myself. We worked every job, right? We worked the front entrance to the theme park to understand if we were asking them to change from ticket takers to greeters with the Magic Band, what does that actually mean? So that we could help them understand and talk to them about why it would be better, and understand how it was going to be harder for a little while until they actually learned the new way of working. But it was a constant effort.
That's so important, to be realistic about what the situation actually is, but also to engage all of the different parts so that this doesn't create some separate entity off to the side that isn't actually usable by
one of the things that made it easier is we had buy-in all the way up to not only the senior management of parks and Bob Iger as the CEO of Disney, but all the way up through the board. We had independent funding, which meant that the organizations that we were asking to change weren't having to compromise their own budgeting process. We showed up with a mandate for change, a direction of change, and the funds to pay for the change, right? So all of those things helped make it easier. Didn't make it simple. It was still really, really hard, but all of those things really helped. We had a consistency of message. We had 3 slides that we used at the beginning of every presentation for 4 years. And it got to the point where I would sit down with Bob Iger and the board, and they would say, yeah, we know those slides. And I would say, yes, I know you do, but I'm going to go through them anyway. Right? It was just a reminder. We have a friction-filled system. We're aiming for a frictionless, customized system. And this is the process that we're going through. Those 3 slides were at the front of every single presentation, whether it was to board, senior management, front end line management, hourly cast members, or the press. It's always the same set of slides.
That's amazing, because it's really easy as you get deep into a project to forget that people don't know what you're doing and what the goal is.
Yeah,
And
they haven't come on the journey with you.
Right. So
Right.
you can take their hand and bring them along. And that kind of structure and process really lays the groundwork for success. So
And it oftentimes feels redundant and repetitive and sometimes even pedantic in the way you're communicating, but it really helps to remember that you're super close to it. You're living and breathing it every day. And most of the people you're trying to communicate to are coming in from moments. And it was the same thing when we were talking to guests. We had to help them understand, hey, this is what we're doing. It may feel a little different. Here's why. And please give us your feedback. Tell us what you like. Is this working for you or not?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of iteration. So that's amazing that you guys sort of built that in. Talk to me on this topic of iteration. Talk to me a little bit about, you talked about the phone as the impetus for what you were doing, but then you didn't really use the phone because the infrastructure wasn't there, and you instead used magic bands, which I love because that technology was developed in the 1950s. And so,
Yeah.
you know,
It was, look, at the end of the day, you want to understand what the options are that are out there. And at the time, the NFC technologies that were built into the phones weren't widely adopted. We were behind Asia, where people were already using phones with vending machines and things like that. And obviously, if we're doing it now with the capabilities that are built in, we wouldn't have had to create our own touch payment system because Apple Pay is already there and we just would have adopted it. But we didn't have that option. It didn't exist yet. And so we needed to create something that was going to work in our infrastructure. It also had the benefit of being very Disney. A magic band is magic. It's not the phone. It's not a device that you're using for other things. It's something that only works at Disney. And it works at the individual level. You can put it on your 6-year-old and they can open the hotel room door. And that's really cool and empowering for a 6-year-old, which makes a lot of sense in the Disney context. So the impetus was understanding that the technology was going to change the way people wanted to interact with us, but then we had to make it ours. We had to make it fit in the context of Disney.
right. And I mean, you also had to make pretty significant behind the scenes investments, right? That would
Huge.
span from the band to the phone to whatever's next after the phone.
If we wanted you to be leveraging Wi-Fi connectivity and all of those things, we had to make sure that those things were not only available, but robust, right? And so it was underlying infrastructure, investment in Wi-Fi cabling, everything you can imagine that gives you not only a robust network of all of this data moving around, in many instances to places where it hadn't been needed previously, but also making sure that you had redundancy and failover capabilities, right? Because again, someone's there on their once in a lifetime vacation, and somebody has an accident and cuts through a piece of fiber optic cabling, which happens from time to time. What do? You got to have failover capabilities. You got to have a level of redundancy, which was an investment to make sure that our core experience, which wasn't a technology experience, it was a theme park experience, never suffered because of the technology.
So what would you do? I mean, this was clearly an amazing success. And, as somebody who visited Disney once it was in place, I have to say, like, it really worked amazingly well. But what would you do? There's never anything that's perfect. So what would you do differently if you could do it again?
I think we would explore changing some of the underlying systems in ways to make the process a little bit easier. I mentioned that. I mentioned the ticketing
Right.
system. I think I would have done even more communication to help people understand how things were going to be different and how they could be different and how that could improve the experience. There were actually pieces of capability that we ended up under delivering on. The individuality that comes from the Magic Band actually allowed creative experiences to be enhanced. And they still to this day have only scratched the surface on the potential for that and what that means for you to walk into a ride versus me to walk into the same ride and have in some way a different kind of storytelling experience. I think we do more of that. Um,
That's
Other than that, look, we set out with a big, hairy, audacious set of goals,
yeah.
and we probably achieved 85% of them, which is pretty amazing given the scale of what we were trying to do.
I mean, it's such an amazing success story. And I love it too, because it drives home for me how it's really about what the business is, not what the technology is, right? Because the people who go to Disney don't need to understand how the technology works. I mean, they don't need to know how the ride works. They don't need to know how the band works. They don't need to know how the Magic Mobile works, right? All they need to know is, wow, it's a lot easier to go to Disney when I don't have to stand in line for a ride, or when I don't have to have a separate way to pay for things. Like, it is
And
my
again,
life easier.
the best technology, and look, Apple did this, Jobs talked about it, is some of the best technology just disappears and it's intuitive and
Yes.
you just know how to use it. And at the end of the day, a Disney theme park experience can never be a phone experience, a technology experience. It has to be a visceral environmental experience. And that was always our touchstone that we came back to, which is how do we leverage the technology but make it disappear so that it never gets in the way of the actual experience, which is families, friends connecting with Disney characters and Disney stories in this cool place.
That's fantastic. I think we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, explaining everything about it, because you make it sound like something that people can do, right? That this is, there's just a process that you need to go through, and you've got to take care of what you're doing and do it in the right way, but you can be amazingly successful.
Yeah, look, it's absolutely doable, and you just have to have patience and perseverance, and hopefully the support up and down the organization because change is hard.
Yes. Okay, so anyone who wants to read more about Nick's experience can check out on DX Bridging the Divide, my Substack, the most recent newsletter article, which was Digital Transformation, the Magic of Disney. There's a QR code up in the corner here that would link you right to that, but you can also just do a Google search or a ChatGPT search, whatever you prefer as your searches. And I would say tune in to our next upcoming interview, which will be diving a little bit deeper on some of the business issues with using cloud. So with that, thank you again, Nick, for your time and for such a great story. And thanks everybody for listening.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.